Following the fall of the Eldar, only fragments of the ancient race survived the birth of the Chaos god Slaanesh. There were the Exodites, who fled the core worlds of the Eldar Empire long before the fall, and the Dark Eldar, who were sheltered in the city of Commorragh. However, perhaps the best known of the survivors would be those now known as the Craftworld Eldar. Though they were once trading vessels, the Craftworlds now serve as the homes for what is probably the majority of the Eldar race. You join me aboard one of these Craftworlds, powered by a psychic infinity circuit that I sincerely hope never fails, built from wraithbone and somehow capable of responding to psychic force. Suppose that explains how I can always get around. Today, we'll be talking about the history of the Craftworlds and the technology that powers them, including tales of a few famous ones that have endured throughout the ages. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis aboard Craftworld Neoverai, and welcome to 40k Stories. The Craftworlds, despite their role as arcs for the Eldar during the fall, have been around even before that tragic time. They served as trading vessels for the most part, though with which races is in fact unknown, but even in those early days one could see that they could take on their current task with more ease. The Craftworlds were essentially self-sufficient communities, only returning to the core worlds of the Eldar Empire a few times per millennium, and this meant that when their race began to fall into depravity, the inhabitants of the Craftworlds were both immune to and unaware of the change. In fact, the Craftworld communities were already becoming different from the rest of the race, forming their own identities and mannerisms that have only been accented over the years. I mean, just look at the difference between the Eldar of Ulthwé and Samehan, or any Craftworld for that matter, if you need an example of this diversity. Of course, this isolation meant that the flying visits back to the main empire proved shocking for the Craftworlders, as they could see clearly the degeneration of their kindred. As for why the main empire didn't see it, it's because it happened slowly and gradually, and they never really appreciated that change until it was too late. In response, the Craftworlds began to flee from the empire, taking with them any Eldar who had not gone with the Exodites, yet still maintained enough sanity to wish to run from what was coming. It is unknown how many Craftworlds there were in those ancient times, but as we know of about 40 that survived the fall and that there were many that did not, I'd suspect there were at least 100 of these mighty vessels, if not more. Even with their foresight to run, many Craftworlds were not able to flee far and fast enough to outrun their destruction. When Slaanesh, known to the Eldar as She Who Thirsts, first announced her existence, the psychic wave she unleashed killed billions if not trillions of Eldar and claimed their souls for the god they had inadvertently formed. Of those in the material realm, only those furthest from the newly formed Eye of Terror survived the fall of the Eldar, and this meant that many Craftworlds were also consumed by She Who Thirsts. The survivors became perhaps the purest remnant of the Eldar race at its pinnacle, known henceforth as the Craftworld Eldar, living aboard their vessels permanently as opposed to settling new worlds. Unfortunately, not even these titanic ships were proof from the trials and tribulations of the galaxy, and over the millennia, a number of Craftworlds have been lost at the hands of both Chaos and the other myriad threats facing the dying Eldar race, including the world where I am today. But, well, maybe we'll get to that a little later. As many of you will know, Eldar technology is rather unique in both aesthetic and design. Much Eldar tech is made from a material known as wraithbone, which is in fact naught but solidified warp energy manipulated by psykers known as bone singers. This includes the Craftworlds, and it is believed that the wraithbone's psychic properties acted as a shield from Slaanesh. This shield also protects the ships when they travel through the warp. Maybe this is the Eldar equivalent to the Imperial field. Cannot confirm though. The most incredible aspect of wraithbone, however, is that it can be manipulated by bone singers to perform any task. It is not the psykers who conduct ship-bound tasks, but the wraithbone itself. This includes carrying communications and even changing shape. Due to the demands of being homes for the Eldar, the wraithbone hulls of the Craftworlds have become much larger than they were before the fall, becoming equivalent to actual planets as opposed to ships. Despite all these changes they've undergone externally, the running of a Craftworld is still maintained by the Infinity Circuit at its heart. The Infinity Circuit is many things. It provides psychic power for the vessel, maintaining a power grid for almost all equipment as well as forming the skeleton of the Craftworld. However, this psychic power comes not from a portal or other more esoteric means, but instead an Infinity Circuit is essentially a soul matrix containing the spirits of the Craftworld's dead. It is the nearest thing the Eldar have to an afterlife these days, as it keeps their souls safe from consumption by Slaanesh and provides them a means of communication with their descendants. The souls of dead Eldar, at least before they are added to the Infinity Circuit, are kept within devices known as Spirit Stones, and these stones can be removed from the circuit again for use in a Wraith construct should the Craftworld be desperate enough to need it. It is said that Infinity Circuit technology was first mastered by Craftworld Endon in M33, with the Farseer who formed it now acting as a welcome party for new souls to the circuit, and unfortunately I do not know what was used as a power source before that time. There is perhaps a third reason brought more starkly into view recently for the use of Spirit Stones and Infinity Circuits. Some Eldar believed that a god was taking shape within the circuits, powered by the souls within. A god that, given enough time and sacrifice, could turn the tables on Slaanesh and save the Eldar race. Eldrad Ulthran, Farseer of Craftworld Ulthwé, nearly sacrificed every Craftworld to awaken it and destroy Slaanesh in turn, but he was stopped by the Death Watch. Of course, in very recent history we saw this entity began to fully awaken. Inaid, God of the Dead, heralded by the former Corsair of Biel-Tan Ivrain and its avatar, the Incarn. I'll not be telling the tales of Ivrain now, as that is a saga in itself that is still taking shape, but her new faction the Inari may well usher in a new age for the Eldar if they handle it correctly, empowering the bodies of the living with the power of Spirit Stones and the souls of the dead. Aside from these core features, in many ways, a Craftworld is no different to a planet in terms of composition. Natural areas with a high degree of biodiversity, a breathable atmosphere, and almost entirely renewable resources. There is an armory, a vehicle bay where the various ships are stored when not on campaign, and of course, there's always the military. Every citizen of a Craftworld is a soldier, known most commonly as guardians, but within many Craftworlds there are also a varying amount of aspect shrines to train those who choose to walk the path of the warrior. The Exarchs who remain there permanently also take on the role of young king, allowing the avatar of Cain to be awakened should the need arise. There are a large number of Craftworlds, and though not all have achieved the same fame in recent times, there are many minor stories I wish to tell before moving on. The first is that of Craftworld Altansar, one of the least trusted of all Craftworlds despite being the home of the Phoenix Lord Malgan Ra. Altansar had been swallowed up by the Eye of Terror during the fall, with the Harvester of Souls forced to abandon his home and bring as many survivors as he could. During the 13th Black Crusade, Malgan Ra was able to return to the Eye and retrieve his Craftworld, returning Altansar to the material realm. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the other Eldar continued to regard the survivors of Altansar with distrust, believing that they could not have survived 10,000 years in the Eye without corruption. As a result of this, avoiding Chaos's temptations, or both, Altansar's inhabitants are known to be very secretive, speaking in whispers and never removing their helms, not helping with dispelling the fears, but I suppose old habits die hard. Another interesting Craftworld is Kaelor, a Craftworld that in modern times has pretty much no history. However, a long time ago, Kaelor made a long-distance webway jump and ended up in a battle with Craftworld's Saim Han after nearly colliding with it. We don't know who won, some say it was Kaelor, but I think that's doubtful given the power of Saim Han today. After millennia of tenuous peace on the Craftworld that saw decadent and borderline fall-inducing practices, along with the deprivation of many inhabitants, Kaelor was embroiled in an internal civil war between the noble houses that the small number of aspect warriors were forced to remain neutral in. No one really knows where Kaelor is today, even the enigmatic Harlequins hardly remember it anymore. It is, however, known to pass through the Calixis sector in Segmentum Obscurus every 1,000 years or so, bringing it near to the Eye of Terror that almost all Eldar wisely avoid. It may also surprise you to know that the most famous yet mysterious location in Eldar society is also believed to be a Craftworld, the Black Library. Hidden deep within the webway, the library is thought to have been constructed by the laughing god Chegarak, and serves as the greatest repository of Eldar history concerning chaos and other forbidden lore. Within the walls of the library are tomes including the Book of the Rana Dandra, which tells the tale of the Eldar's end, as well as chaos artifacts such as the legendary Book of Magnus. It is also supposed to receive the Book of Stern, written by the Sister of Battle Ephrael Stern, who is pursued by both Chaos and the Inquisition. Her tale is extravagant indeed, and the book to which she gives her name is said to be a comprehensive document on Slaanesh, including the weaknesses of She Who Thirsts, so you can see why the Eldar want it. Stern is believed to be travelling to the library with the book. With it in their hands, who knows what future the Eldar could shape for themselves. There are some lost Craftworlds, however, as well. We've all heard of Malantai, which had its infinity circuit devoured by a unique Tyranid organism that became known as the Doom of Malantai before the Zonethrope practically wiped out the Craftworld single-handedly. Slaanesh is known to have claimed two Craftworlds through invasion in recent times, Keris and Buir-Gaith, and for those Eldar, I truly feel sorry. Meanwhile, Craftworld Cheyenne Shah was lost at some time over the years and was actually explored by the Tau Empire in late M41. They were unsuccessful in their exploration though, being driven off by the sadistic harlequins of the Mask of the Frozen Stars, who have tormented many Xenos races over the years just for their or maybe Chegarak's amusement. I don't really have the time to cover every major Craftworld of the modern age, as we'll be getting to our next Legion world relatively soon. However, there are two stories I feel need to be told, those of Endon and Biel-Tan. As we mentioned earlier, it is believed that Craftworld Endon first developed the Infinity Circuit, and it's common for this Craftworld to use Soulstone technology a lot today, more so than other Craftworlds. The initial goal of the Spirit Stones was to ward off Slaanesh, keeping the souls of Endon safe from She Who Thirsts after their deaths. However, it became necessary to recall these fallen warriors once more during a campaign against Zemon, one of the mysterious fallen angels, that could have run for several millennia until its eventual end in M37. We don't actually know the official start date. These souls were awakened by the unique psykers known as Spirit Seers, using resilient bodies of wraithbone and wielding weapons that could not be held in conventional hands. In fact, so many have been awakened that the ancient noble houses have begun to reform, populated almost entirely by these wraith constructs and now known as ghost houses that play a major role in Endon politics. That's not to say that the remaining living of Endon are particularly fond of the arrangement. They essentially are practicing necromancy, and the Dark Eldar take great pleasure in their angst over the issue. In fact, they bail the Endon out against orcs just so that they can keep getting some amusement. To be honest, it may well not be long before the entire population, essential spirit seers aside, are entombed in wraithbone, as Endon battles extinction perhaps harder than any other Craftworld. Well, maybe not any other, but we'll get to that. 80% of the population was wiped out after long-running battles with a Tyranid High Fleet Kraken, and battles with Chaos and an Orc invasion have done even more damage. Most recently, during the 13th Black Crusade, Endon was invaded yet again, though by forces of Nurgle as opposed to Slaanesh. I don't really know why it was Nurgle, but hey. It took the arrival of the newly formed Ynnari to save the Craftworld from the rotting space hulks, and one of Endon's heroes was forced to lay down his life. Prince Uriel was an autarch, perhaps the greatest naval commander of the entire Eldar race, but he had gone into self-imposed exile following a chaos attack that saw him stripped of his rank. He returned at the head of a vast corsair or pirate fleet when High Fleet Kraken came, saving his Craftworld and returning to the fold, and he would sacrifice himself to destroy the main invading space hulk. And yet, thanks to the incredible power over life and death granted by Inaid, Ivrain was able to resurrect Uriel and reveal his signature weapon, the Spear of Twilight, to be one of the 5 crone swords that the emissary believes will fully awaken the God of the Dead. Despite the almost loss of their champion and the increasing reliance on the Ghost Warriors, an alternate name for the Wraith constructs, Endon survivors remain hopeful that their Craftworld will burn bright again, just like the flame of Aser-Yan that they bear as their sigil. In the early days after the fall, Craftworlds Endon and Biel-Tan were closely allied, sharing a combined goal of restoring the Eldar Empire. However, the two had a disagreement about their enemies. Endon sought only to defeat Chaos, whilst the more warlike Biel-Tan preferred dominance over all within the galaxy. There was no war, not even a severance of their alliance officially, but the two drifted apart to pursue their own goals. Biel-Tan have continued their hardline militaristic stance, focusing particularly on the non-Eldar races who have unknowingly, and unfortunately, colonized the former Maiden Worlds, though they have a special hatred for the Orcs. Their signature military units, their equivalent to the Ghost Warriors of Endon, are in fact the Aspect Warriors. This symbolizes that more of the inhabitants of Biel-Tan walk the path of the warrior, and the assumedly numerous exarchs actually form a council known as the Court of the Young King, selecting the sacrifice for the Avatar of Cain themselves as opposed to the Seer Council that usually does it. Honestly, given the militarist nature of Biel-Tan, this isn't that surprising, and the Craftworld plays on this using a unique formation known as the Swordwind that suits the Aspect Warriors down to the ground. And yet, it could not save Biel-Tan from near annihilation during the 13th Black Crusade. In response to the rise of the Ynnari, a large demonic force invaded Biel-Tan, former home of Ivrain and the resting place of several crone swords. The invasion was spearheaded by the Mask of Slaanesh along with the disgraced bloodthirster Skarbrand, who didn't get on given their patron gods hate each other, but were able to form a truce just long enough to see it through. Using a webway portal on a maiden world, the Mask infiltrated Biel-Tan for a time before the deception was revealed and the full invasion began. Despite the presence of the Phoenix Lord Jane Zar, the Mask was able to infiltrate the Infinity Circuit to Biel-Tan, destroying the Craftworld from the inside. At least until Yvrain and co showed up. The Inari arrived on Biel-Tan, though there were very few Craftworlders amongst them at the time, as I believe they'd come straight from Comorra, and they helped to turn the tide of the battle. Even Skarbrand could not stand against them, but it was the Mask and her meddling in the Infinity Circuit that were the true challenge and objective for Yvrain. She was in fact originally from Biel-Tan, as we mentioned, and in order to save her home from She Who Thirsts, she began a massive ritual. The exact details are unknown, but by the end, the mask had been driven off and Incarn, avatar of Inade, was birthed, though the cost in souls had been massive. I assume Slaanesh got to those wayward ones, and for them I feel truly sorry. We don't really know how good Inade is at keeping souls off Slaanesh. This battle, known today as the Fracture of Biel-Tan, was one of the first fought by the Inari in their quest, taking place not long before the invasion of Endon, and whilst it will not be the last, or perhaps even the most costly for the Eldar, I can assure you that it will never be forgotten. I assume Biel-Tan is rebuilding as best it can, slowly but surely. I suspect, though, they'll not be threatening the other races anytime soon, since they're kind of clinging on to survival right now. And there you have it. The history and science of the Eldar Craftworlds, at least as far as we can understand it, along with the tales of a few famous ones. I thought about telling the tale of the place I'm in, but that's for another time. These mighty, planet-sized vessels are truly incredible feats of psychic power and engineering, and whilst I doubt the rest of the galaxy will ever truly comprehend them, they are awe-inspiring nonetheless. Now, we must move on from these less conventional worlds to a more traditional one, to tell the tale of perhaps the greatest artisans within the Adeptus Astartes. Their Primarch is unique in many ways, as is the lack of division following the Horus Heresy. I hope you can join us for that next time, as we complete the second third of our Legions mini-series. Thank you all for watching. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.